Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're really delighted that all of you are here. I'm Rabbi Gary Breton Granitor. I'm the president of the Nantucket Interfaith Council, and it's been one of the great honors of my life to be able to serve this community and be able to bring all of these various faith communities together in service of Nantucket. And just if you're not familiar with the Interfaith Council, one of the most important things that we do, and we do a lot of things, one of the most important things that we do is we are the stewards of the Nantucket Food, Fuel, and Rental Assistance Program and the Food Pantry, the Medical Transportation Assistance Program. We are dedicated to really trying to help the indigent and poor in our community, recognizing that it is a reality and a reality that the various faith communities all take very, very seriously. So I'm honored to be able to represent the interfaith community, but more importantly, I'm honored to be able to work with these ladies and gentlemen of the clergy here on this island. But let us not forget that what brings us together today is an imam. So that is a really remarkable thing, and this has been a great weekend. The weekend really came about as a growth of a discussion that we were becoming increasingly aware of. Last year, the Interfaith Council drafted a letter to the heads of the public schools here on the island because there were a rising number of anti-Black, anti-Brown, anti-Semitic incidents that we had heard about in the school system. And the Interfaith Council was very concerned about that. So that began our awareness of kind of a pervasive but extant issues of bias in our own community. That really came to a head in November when President Biden did his visit to our island, and there were protests and counter-protests. And whereas everybody has a right to express their opinion, there was an undercurrent of vitriol that was really disturbing on both sides. And so the Interfaith Council started to discuss it, and then it was shared with the board of Congregation Shirat Hayam. The board took this seriously, and due to the good agency of our past president, Peter Khan, who is well connected with Imam Abdullah Antepli, they all made this possible, bring him here, and for us to confront these various kinds of bias. So with that, I just want to kind of introduce everybody who is here. I'll start with my left. This is Reverend Althea Smith from the Unitarian Church, Reverend Jody Fondell from the First Congregational Church, Father John Murray from St. Mary's, Imam Antepli, Reverend Carr Holland from the Sconset Chapel, Reverend Derek Worthington from this place, our host, and we're grateful to the Summer Street Church for hosting us. By the way, bathrooms are downstairs. Just go out in the lobby and take the stairs down. But thank you, Reverend Worthington. And then Reverend Max Wolf from the St. Paul's Episcopal Church. We are really grateful that they are all here. We're grateful that you're here. And without further ado, Imam Antepli.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon you all. When was the last time you saw an imam and rabbi and a couple of pastors walking into anywhere? This feels like a beginning of a very wonderful joke. But the picture that everybody represents, are you able to hear me well?
I hear you online.
Oh.
Yep.
The picture that we represent, one would hope the people who are authentically, deeply, seriously, and sincerely rooted in one particular faith tradition and engaging and developing a relationship, partnership for common cause without that compromise. Some people may rather naively and to me incorrectly would assume interfaith can only happen if you contract in your own faith tradition, if you compromise. In order to, for being truthfully, deeply committed, serious tradition, in one particular tradition, for the minds of many people, especially in the postmodern world, as if that necessitates that you can't develop an appreciation, respect, admiration without signing the membership form of other faith tradition. The truth cannot be further than this one. Because in so many ways, our pluralistic creation, ethnically, religiously, culturally, as I believe it as a Muslim, it is part of the divine plan. In the Quran, God says, I created you from a single man and single woman, and I divided you into nations and tribes and religions. It's one of the greatest, really, one of the clearest canonical scriptural testimony of our differences. Says, I created you different, and therefore, I am just putting a side note here, disregarding that difference is disrespecting the creator of the heavens and the earth and everything in it, but explains the wisdom so that you will get to know one another. Ta'arifu, you will engage with one another. That's the whole point. You become a complete and whole person in a way by being deeply rooted in one faith tradition, and then get to know your neighbors. And few chapters later, another remarkable indication and testimony from my own faith tradition is, God says, if I wanted, I would have created you all one. If I wanted, I could have created you from all faith tradition, just very homogeneous. Boy, the world could be such a boring place then. Says, I created you different so that you will compete. The word is competition. You will compete in doing God's work and serving God's children. In a way, you have to be a good team member, good sports person. We are watching the Olympiads. And we have to compete in doing work. Who will do the better job in feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, taking care of the poor and orphans, and etc. This is at the heart of our religion. This necessitates religion. Doesn't necessitate shying away or compromising religion. But today, me and my colleagues, we would like to understand in our society and globally, the hate is on the rise. Every form of voices of exclusion and unwelcome is in single and sometimes double and triple digits rise. Anti-black racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, homophobia, populism is increasing, and these forces of hate and unwelcome and racism, every form and different manifestations of evil is coming from every possible direction. It's coming from political right, it's coming from political left, it is coming from religious communities, it is coming from non-religious communities. We would like to briefly brainstorm and discuss among ourselves first and then with you, what is the role of religion in understanding and diagnosing why now and why in this scale there's a rise in the form of many different forms of racism, hatred in American society or globally speaking. Do religions play its role in preventing, in diagnosing and coming up with treatment methods in de-escalating this rising tides of hate? This is what we would like to discuss with you. Religion in its origin, as we members of the faith tradition believe, it is divine. But its manifestation, it's human. As we institutionalize religion, as we give voice to God's word and wisdom, as we take God's wisdom into manifestation, in so many ways it's human. And therefore, anything religious is also both in its inspiration could be divine, as confessionally we believe, but its manifestation, it's human. And therefore, what is good, bad, and ugly in human is also exists in the faith traditions as well. I think in one way we can really be honest with ourselves. If we stop selectively approaching religion and only pick up what's right, what feels popular, what feels welcoming, inclusive, and when we see what is also bad and ugly about humanity, it also exists in the faith tradition, in the religion, in the scripture itself. There is an ambivalence of human nature, that we can be better than angels, or we can be worse than demons. And this aspect also exists in our religious traditions as well. This ambivalence of the sacred and ambivalence of human nature is best understood in the following Native American story. If you heard this story, no one can repeat this story enough. I think it's a beautifully dense wisdom of what I'm trying to convey here. A Native American chief convenes all the teenagers of the tribe. And as these teenagers will become adult and will take the leadership of the tribe, he wants to give the life lessons and wisdom into these people, these youngsters. He says, there is an evil and bad wolf in you, and there's a good and angelic wolf in you. And whichever wolf, and they will constantly fight. They will constantly in you, evil wolf and the good wolf will be constantly battling in you. And of course, the teenagers immediately ask, which wolf will ultimately win? Which wolf will win this battle between good and evil in me? And the Native American chief so wisely says, whichever wolf you feed, whichever wolf you nurture, whichever wolf you empower, inspire. Religions have, in a way, religions also have these evil wolves and good wolves in them. And it is up to us, it is up to the believers, it's up to the practitioners to feed, nurture, and empower the good wolf in faith traditions and put a very tight leash on the evil wolf, the teachings that could be interpreted and could be a source for violence, hatred, and discrimination and unwelcome to people of particular faith tradition or of no faith tradition. So what was the role of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism in their ability to nurture the good side of humanity and lift up and highlight and amplify the more welcoming and inclusive nature of their traditions or their theology? And in what way religions played a role, in all honesty, in becoming the source of violence, discrimination? Often, this is my one maybe internal critique to faith communities and interfaith communities at large. Our ability to represent the good of the tradition, I think we do a better job. But our ability to recognize parts of our tradition that has become directly or indirectly source of this rising hate and rising discrimination, rising unwelcome and exclusion, so far, general assessment of our faith traditions or interfaith efforts has been falling short. And that's why you see these well-meaning efforts, these well-meaning initiatives and projects or coming together around interfaith is not able to hold up to the rising tides of unwelcome. And you see this since October 7, that was very visible. All the wonderful interfaith initiatives, Jewish-Muslim relations, conversations, they couldn't hold on to. They couldn't hold on to what October 7, this heinous, barbaric, treacherous, ugly terrorist act that committed by Hamas and all the innocent civilian casualties, this disproportionate response that causing thousands of, tens of thousands of people, innocent people's death, about 40,000 according to most latest count, that is about 9,000 of which are children. Why is that? Why all these wonderful efforts and good and well-meaning people are not able to, they can only get together, they can only form relationships and coalitions in good days, per se. But when their teachings are tested through difficult conversations, is there a way in which we can take our interfaith efforts to deeper level, substantive level, much more, we can bond our ties strong level that even when we disagree, even when we see current realities unfolding on the ground in such significant and starkly different and maybe contradictory ways, the teachings and the connecting spiritual and ethical moral tissues that we have built as interfaith partners would hold on to this. One of my theories is, I think a lot of these interfaith partnerships, maybe 3 points I will mention this and then come up with some sort of a conclusive remark so that that will open up the conversation. Many of these interfaith efforts, in my own, as somebody who dedicated all his entire life into interfaith relationships, with all due respect to the good intentions and the sincere and pure thinking behind it, often they only selectively focus on the good side of the religion. So when they come together, they see themselves not as prophetic moral critique of their tradition, especially in front of the members of the other faith tradition. They see themselves as the ambassadors of their tradition. So therefore, they put their best feet on the ground. They only show the good side and the better side. How many times I attended these interfaith activities? And again, these are critiques in good spirit so that we can do better. I attended one interfaith conversation where everybody is talking about gender rights in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And if you listen to everybody, what they are saying, they are accurate in their explanation of women's rights in these faith traditions. But all they talk about is the fuller side of the glass, as if there is no gender problem in the orthodoxy of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as if the current reality of the Muslim majority, Christian majority, or the Jewish majority societies is free from these problems. They are only focusing on, in these interfaith partnerships, interfaith conversations, as the ambassadors or spokespeople, understandably, in a way talking about I don't know if you ever talk to the ambassadors of any country. They only repeat what the headquarters says. And they can never be wrong. They are always the good stuff. Secondly, I think a lot of our interfaith efforts, to me unwisely, but understandably to a certain extent, it overemphasizes the commonalities and it shies away from the differences. It overemphasizes when we get together as different faith traditions, it emphasizes what we share in common, what we can unite, what we can agree, the common ground between us. The similarities are overemphasized, whereas differences, disagreements, theological and historical departures from one another is at best sugar-coated, flattened, or at worst completely ignored and not even mentioned. Therefore, these interfaith corporations, our ability to take a collective stand against common enemies of racism, hate, unwelcome, and exclusion is not as strong, because ultimately as good and as heartwarming, as schmoozy and fluffy of what we share in common, they are nice, but ultimately what makes us who we are in our distinct faith traditions is not our similarities. It's our differences. And differences, as I mentioned in the Holy Quran, and you can find similar teachings both in Christianity and Judaism and other faith traditions as well, our identities are primarily based on our differences. The ultimate relativism, seeing every path as equal, or only focusing on common values and common principles that we share, it really flattens the importance and the strength of the distinct, unique articulations of our faith traditions. By not focusing enough on our differences, by not turning these interfaith conversations into rich educational resources where we can understand, learn from, inspired from our differences, I think we are doing ourselves a disservice. It's not a full representation of the reality of our faith tradition, but also it's also taking the power, because only when we learn how to turn our differences as a source of celebration, as a source of praise and admiration, those bounds, even when you disagree, even when you get completely appalled by some of the practices or political developments of our particular tradition, only then it will hold. The late Lutheran, Swedish Lutheran Harvard professor, I cannot remember his name, coins this term as holy envy. If you really study, if you are really deeply rooted in one particular faith tradition, and if you learn how to make this cross-faith, cross-cultural engagement as successful as you should, You develop holy envy, holy jealousy of the faith tradition. In a way, you find out and learn about a concept in other faith tradition that you don't have in your own, and you're not interested in converting or changing your team, but you develop an incredible admiration as a holy envy, a source of holy envy, as much as possible. Why interfaith conversations are often receiving criticism of being toothless, weak, fluffy, ceremonial, when push comes to shove, when difficult issues like the time, that moment that we are in, it is not as effective in addressing these common social, ethical, moral problems, is we don't have enough envies. We don't have enough ability to build ethical, moral bridges over our differences. Especially on, for example, this war in Gaza between Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, they see the reality so differently, but they don't have additional ethical, moral, overarching connection, or through their different understanding, different perception, different interpretation of these political developments or different political conflict on the ground. And therefore, those similarities, that over-investment into what we share, our common ancestors as Abraham, our common maternal ancestors as Sarah, Hagar, it's not holding. Is there a way in which we can invest our interfaith partnership beyond celebration of our similarities, but understanding and respecting our differences is another strategy that I am inviting myself to. And my time commitment is incredibly out of line. The last thing, maybe before I welcome my colleagues to respond and open up to Q&A, is that I would like to remind for ourselves, one of the most deceitful, harmful, and destructive power of evil of the bat wolf, as I mentioned in my previous talks, the evil of racism, exclusion, unwelcome, it often distracts us by two major ways. It distracts us becoming invisible. It distracts us becoming invisible to the eyes of the flesh, eyes of the head. You can only see evil through the eyes of the heart and morality. And it is the job of religion and faith, and especially interfaith efforts, to empower, encourage, and also improve the competency of the believer, not to see only things through their eyes. And it distracts us, usually racism, evils of any form of exclusion or hate, by assigning the guilt into racists, by assigning the guilt into people, the clownish circus manifestations of this hate. Say anti-black racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. When people hear this, they only think about people who are burning the crosses, wearing the hoodies, or shouting on January 6th, etc. Whereas the real problem and real racism, real exclusion, real thing that is pumping hate into the hearts and minds of people are in the policies, in the housing policies, in the policing policies, in the immigration policies. And most of these policies are designed, implemented by not racists. Our inability to see racism in the absence of racists, our inability to see hate in the absence of hateful people. If we only recognize hate and racism and unwelcome when it becomes violent and extremist, and if we cannot recognize it, if it is blending itself into the systems of governance, this requires waking up from the slumber. Therefore, one of the most important element of faith is to be prophetic. Our faith traditions of all kinds, but especially in Judaism and Christianity and Islam, the role of religion is not to numb people's morality, numb their moral conscience, not to reduce their moral anxiety. Their job is to be prophetic, to increase their moral anxiety. The prophets that brought our faith traditions to us, none of them came to their people and said, I am the prophet of God, I received revelation, and God loves you. Anyone, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Solomon, David, Muhammad, none of them came and said, you guys don't have to change anything. God is dancing happily in the heavens. Don't do anything. So therefore, if we are the religious people of faith, and holding religious leadership in our faith tradition, part of our job is to tell people what they don't want to hear. Part of our job is to remove the veils from their eyes and force them to see through the eyes of their heart, through their soul, to be morally awakening them and create moral outrage to issues that has been providing all sorts of evil, including rising hate and anti-Semitism. I think, or hate, different forms of hate to all other groups. We seem to be lacking in that prophetic moral voice in our tradition, and we don't seem to have it as much as we can, and our interfaith efforts are not necessarily providing that lacking prophetic moral critique of ourselves. Therefore, we are assigning the guilt. Therefore, we are assigning the guilt a bunch of clownish, circusish, racist and haters, and we don't see that as even the moderate people. We don't see that we are part of the problem. That extremists of the far right and far left is gaining so much power and legitimacy from the laziness, from the inactiveness, from the sleepy nature of the main moderate people. I grew to almost to a point dislike and find it distasteful, this moderate version. If moderate means you don't have to do anything. You assign the guilt to the extremists, but you don't understand by being inactive, by not taking your moderate understanding, enlightened understanding of your faith tradition, by not becoming radical peacemaker, bridge builder, somebody who's combating hate with some vengeance and fever, you are part of the problem. I think Dr. King, when he went to Birmingham jail, he wrote letters not to the KKK leaders. He didn't write letters to the racists of his time. He wrote letters to every mainline Protestant church leaders saying, where are you? Your inaction in the face of this rising racism, discrimination, and segregation, your inability to not prioritize this fight is exactly heart of the problem. They invited people who otherwise think themselves as peaceful, moderate, enlightened, unless the majority of our faith traditions, majority of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and Hindus, and Buddhists, unless they realize their inaction is part of the problem, not a bunch of racist and hateful people. And then the last, incredibly deceitful and disempowering and toxic and poisonous nature of evil, in this case hate, is it always, even if you are morally alert and you see and recognize, yes, there is a problem of anti-Semitism, there is a problem of homophobia, there is a problem of Islamophobia, there is a problem of black anti-Semitism, but it makes you understand this problem in a fragmented and silo way. So if you are seeing anti-black racism, but if you are not black, it says it's the problem of the black people. Anti-Semitism is the Jewish problem. Homophobia is the gay problem. Islamophobia is the Muslim problem. It's a problem relates to the Muslim community, and therefore Muslims should be putting their acts together and organize themselves and fix this problem. This is crippling our ability to come back to the moral action and combat the changes. So two homework that I would like to discuss with you. How can we stop our religions, our faith traditions, empowering the bad and evil wolves in our society? How do you silence the troubling, hating, racist voices in our faith tradition by speaking louder, by working harder, by being more relentless, not just going and preventing these people, but working as hard as them? I'll give you one example, even though my timing is incredibly off. I came to Duke in July 2008. In a very particular, very unique, very non-representative Jewish community in Lynchburg, Virginia. I don't know who these people are, but the address is Lynchburg, Virginia. Every month, every weekend, last weekend of the month, they send me a literature basically saying I will be in hellfire forever. They belong to a very particular, non-representative, very marginal interpretation of Christianity, and they think unless you believe in Christianity like them, you will be damned to hell. It's been 16 years, those letters are still coming. Again, these people don't represent at all wonderful elements and aspects of the majority of the Christian tradition. And you may find, most Christians would find their interpretation of Christianity incredibly troubling. But not as many Christians work as hard as these people. These are very expensive material. In graphic images, they are inviting me to their faith tradition, and otherwise I'm gonna be condemned to hell. And I always reply to this Gmail address. Look, even if you want me to convert, you have a marketing problem. Like, this is so unlikable. At least you should make this thing a little bit more appealing, more attractive. But bad guys, elements that is feeding the bad wolves is working harder. And the good guys and moderates are not working as hard as possible. So how can we turn these interfaith conversations beyond the goodwill and ceremonies and holding hands and kumbayas and let's get along, and how can we turn it into a really effective ways to deal with difficult issues within our communities and between our communities as much as possible? And second, how can we stop seeing manifestations of hate regardless of whose community is primarily affected by that hate, and see a hate and exclusion unwelcome to one community as a hate and discrimination and evil and unacceptable reality for all of us, and build a front against hate together. That is our task, and looking forward to being a foot soldier in that task with you from here on. Thank you very much.